Hello and welcome back to the latest episode of Robins on the Wire, a Bristol Life podcast covering all things Bristol City. And somehow it's the international break again, the November one this time. Feels like this one's come around incredibly quickly, Jack, but on the whole, after a difficult few weeks, it feels like Bristol City are heading into it in quite a good place.
Yeah, I think if you look at this sort of block, because as we've kind of broken them down into it for the most part, we've had 6 games, taken 10 points out of a possible 18. Quite happy with that. Obviously, you had the huge high of winning 3 in a row, Norwich, Southampton, and Birmingham, and then you had the low of losing the next 2 in pretty poor fashion. I think it's fair to say, and then you get the very good and well earned point. I think at Vicarage Road, who I believe Watford are unbeaten there this season. I think that's what they said on Sky, and obviously that stayed, which is a shame, but a good point nonetheless. You know, it's the best that anyone's come away with, or joint best, I suppose, that anyone's come away from there having this season. So I'm quite happy with it.
Yeah, I think they might have lost one, but I might even be wrong there. I know the only team with a better record at home this season, I think, was Coventry. So it's not an easy place to go, and that was something Gerhard Struber made abundantly clear pre-match. And I think with that in mind, you know, we had a bit of a different press conference last week. It was part of the EFL Week of Action. We were in St Paul's with him, Adam Randall, a load of kids as part of the Robins Foundation, and Max O'Leary as well. And I think, you know, talking to both Adam Randall and Gerhard Struber, they were emphasising how difficult a challenge this was going to be, but equally how important it could be to head into the break with 3 points under their belt. And with that in mind, I have to say I was more than a little bit surprised when the team news came out. And, you know, I can offer a little bit of insight into the press room with quite often me and the guys from the BBC. Your team will come out and you'll be trying to work out how it's going to line up. Sometimes you talk to people from the club if you can, but you know, it's me and the guys from the BBC, including Gary Hours, trying to work out quite what it was when the team dropped. Because let's be honest, Jack, the headline news was Fally Mayulu starting, wasn't it? The bigger headline news was that it was 2 strikers, and then Lord knows what else I was thinking at 7:15, to be quite honest.
Yeah, it took me a good few minutes to try and work out what was going to happen. I think we were messaging, kind of working out various systems that it could be. And yeah, like you say, the kind of biggest surprise in there was Mayulu starting, and the fact it was 2 up front. I think if you told everyone before the game it was 2 up front, everyone would have gone, right, okay, kind of makes sense with the injuries in midfield. You kind of shift someone out, that sort of thing. Emil Rees and Sinclair Armstrong, right? And then you see big Fally Mayulu turn up, and you're a bit confused as to what's going on. So that was certainly interesting. And then you had Adam Randall effectively run in the middle of the park on his own, with Twine and Mehmeti kind of dropping in when required for large parts of the game, which was interesting to see again. Obviously, dropping Viner back, I think, is probably a good thing. I found it a very odd team, but to be fair, it worked, didn't it? So can't really complain.
I didn't realise till about 20 minutes in when we got that first proper look at it. All I could think was it was basically Dean Holden ball, wasn't it? If you think back to how he used to set up Bristol City, it was quite often Andy Vyman and Jamie Patterson as those 2 10s with you had a Chris Brunt or a Tyreek Backinson and Adam Nash. It all feels like a long time ago now.
Henry
Lansbury, yeah, exactly. You know, that sort of one anchor in midfield, a back 3, and then wing backs that are going to get up, and two quite big strikers in Fally and Sinclair. And it didn't kind of hit me till about half time. I was like, oh my God, I've just realised what this system is. But like you said, it was I had a bit of fun, I have to say. Like sometimes that hour and a quarter between the team news and the game, you know, I can be sat there scratching my head. But I was there desperately trying to see anything I could in the warm up to try to work out who might be where. And then, you know, you're tweeting it out and you're thinking that could be complete rubbish. You know, it was. We don't get the luxury of talking to Gerhard Struber pre-match like the radio guys. And I think even if we did, he's not going to sit there and tell us exactly what his team's going to look like. But
no.
You know, in a weird way, although I think it made a lot of fans who already weren't particularly confident, probably even less confident when they saw the team. It was a bit exciting, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. It was interesting. You mentioned Dean Holden there. I'm pretty sure that system got us a nice 6-0 loss at Vicarage Road. So it's a good job it didn't go like that. You know, a much better result, even if the defending for their goal was maybe slightly questionable, which I'm sure we'll come on to in a minute. You can't give Lauser Loser that amount of space in the middle of the park. He's probably one of the most informed and arguably best midfielders in the division at the moment. But But yeah, it was interesting. It adds that nice little level of intrigue. We've had that a little bit recently with the amount of injuries. I think trying to work out who's playing in midfield and who's playing at right back and the centre back and so on and so forth. It's always an interesting one to look out for, isn't it? But yeah, ultimately you take the point and you run with it, I think.
Yeah, we'll kind of get into the game properly now. I think it's just important to mention that, obviously Neto Borges didn't make it. My understanding was that City would be in contention. I think that's only natural when, you've got a player withdrawn for more of a precaution rather than injury. There was a hope, I think, after the scan results came back that, if we need to, we can throw him in. Gerhard pretty much confirmed to the radio after the game it was a case of it just came around a little bit too soon for that to happen in the end. Similar with Mark Sykes, won't be going away with Ireland. That's been confirmed now by the Irish FA as well. After that I don't really know, laceration to the shin, cut sounds too soft, doesn't it? When the bone was poking out, I'm guessing that's a bit more severe than your run-of-the-mill cut. But yeah, so obviously those two missed out. So it was only 2 changes with Armstrong and Mayulu in for Reece and Borges. Obviously, like we've mentioned, completely different look. And then I think with about 6 minutes on the clock, Jack, it had that slight feeling of, oh God, this could be a long night. You mentioned that goal, and while it was a brilliant pass, it just seemed too easy, didn't it?
Yeah, it did feel way too easy. I don't know if it was a case of, I feel like the defence, where they were saying on Sky anyway, I don't know if you've got the luxury of hearing the commentary while you're up in the press box, that Tanner probably should have dropped alongside, was it Bowler who scored the goal?
Yeah.
And I think that they were kind of making the point that if a midfielder's not got to instantly manage to be on top of Louser, I've got to go with that anyway, I don't know how you say it, then the defence needs to be dropping because you know that sort of ball's probably got to come with a player of his quality, which is maybe a little bit harsh, but ultimately it did cost us a goal. So I think maybe if you've got 2 actual midfielders in there, in let's say that's Adam Randall and Jason Knight, one of them probably has the license to push onto him, and you might still not stop the ball, and if so, then fair play, that's a hell of a goal. But if you manage to just close him down a little bit and don't give him as much time to just pick out and play it wherever he wants. But credit to him, hell of a ball and a really good finish as well.
It was a wicked pick out, wasn't it? I think, it's one of those quite early in the game, you're setting stuff up with like live blogs and tweets and everything. You are aware of what's happening, but you don't necessarily see anything. And I saw him on the halfway line, and you're kind of thinking, oh, there's no danger there. Do you know what I mean? You're like, whatever. And in the second or what, I looked down at my keyboard, the ball's over the top and Bowler's bringing it down. And I think it probably went under the radar a little bit, just how good his touch was. I don't know if you've seen that sort of slow-mo angle from by the away end, and he just plucks it out the air. Vitek does exactly what he needs to do, comes out, tries to make himself as big as possible, and it is a really good finish. And one thing I'd say is Tanner does all he can once he's got there to try to put him off. Obviously, it didn't end up being enough, but I think, like I hinted at a second ago, it just had that feeling of, oh my, like you had the feeling that team, and with the lineup that had been picked, it was a case of how long can we stay in the game and produce that one moment of quality to maybe nick something. And when you're 1-0 down after 6 minutes, you feel like that's obviously it's different. We're not the players, but from where I was sat, and I think probably from what most people had seen in the away end, you kind of got that feeling of, oh God, the plan's gone out the window immediately.
Yeah, that's certainly. I mean, I didn't manage to make it up to Watford because of university commitments, but was sitting watching it on the telly. It was very much like, okay, here we go again. We're on for a Stoke-esque performance here, or another 6-0 at Vicarage Road was kind of running through my mind. I was like, please not again. I don't want to sit and do that again. But it wasn't. So I think after that, from off the top of my head anyway, it felt like we almost woke up a little bit and were quicker to the ball and stopped a lot of their attacks quite well. Vitek still having a very good game though, to be fair to him.
Yeah, I was going to say I think there was that little passage, probably. It was weird. We're under cover, but you kind of looked up at the floodlights and the rain looked like it was properly swirling. And it started tipping it down, and there was a couple of chances where what were probably quite routine stops for Vitek got some a fair bit quicker than I imagine he was expecting off the surface. There was I can't remember which player it was, but had a shot from the edge of the box on the half volley that skidded through, and he kind of, I don't know what it was he got behind it, but he got, whether it was a big hand or his chest, it might have been in his face, I'm not sure, something behind it and parried it out. And it just felt like City in that little bit where suddenly the rain was falling, it all started to feel a bit frantic. They'd actually kind of dug in really well because it, like you kind of mentioned, it had that sort of feeling of Stoke where going 1-0 down's bad, but it's when you get to 2-3 inside half an hour, that's when the game goes beyond you. And what they did really well on Friday night was just stopped it slipping away. And then, we said they were kind of almost waiting for that chance, and it comes from a dead ball. Before we get on to the bit I think everyone wants to talk about, a bit more Scott Twine magic, I think it's worth giving plenty of praise to Anis Mehmeti and Sinclair Armstrong. Because the little outside the boot, ball down the line for Armstrong to chase is superb. His runs time perfectly, gets his body in the way and takes the contact in a way that means the referee simply has to give the foul. And that could have been quite easily been a penalty with how close it was. But I think I'll let you talk through the rest, Jack, because I'll be honest, from where we were, you kind of can't get, you've not got the perfect angle of a free kick. You just see it end up in the back of the net, but it looked a peach to me.
It's a very good hit. It's some very questionable goalkeeping as well. I was talking to a Watford fan last night who I go to uni with, and he was very much like he's had a couple of those in his time there, I think, from free kicks especially, which is, when you line it up against Scott Twine, something that I'm sure Twine knew, and I'm sure our coaching staff knew, that if you can get it in the right sort of area for the free kick, then we've probably got the best free kick taker in England, arguably the world, in terms of consistency, up against a goalkeeper who seemingly doesn't really like to face them. So luckily, I think once he got it on target and managed to squeeze it in the post, the keeper probably should do a little bit better for me. But either way, it's a quality strike. And I think that's his 17th direct free kick since 2018 or something, that's a lot of free kicks to score in it.
It's mental, isn't it? And I think actually kind of the thing I noticed was I think that's his 6th of the season. He's City's top goal scorer, and he only got 5, I think, last year in the Championship. So, I'm pretty sure, because he didn't do loads, did he, in the Championship before he joined Bristol City. I'm pretty sure that means he's probably already got his career best tally in the division. I'm pretty sure he got up near the 20 mark in League One for MK. One year when he was pretty much playing as a second striker. But I do think it's interesting, isn't it? Because I can't remember how much time we spent on it on last week's episode after Blackburn. But certainly a lot of the discourse around fans on social media was around just how well Scott Twine's been playing. I think there were a few accusations of him being that sort of luxury player again. And away from the free kick on Friday night, he put to me, it was a real reminder of just how complete a footballer he can be when he's at his best. And I'm not saying he does that every week, because it'd be wrong to say so. But when he's like that, he is such an asset to this team, and he can genuinely decide games on his own.
Yeah, he is. He's an incredible footballer. And we touched on it, I think, in the last podcast about how the stats were maybe a little bit unkind to him, and the 15 duels lost against, who did we actually play? Blackburn. He won 5 out of 7 at the weekend. On Friday night, 71%, won half of his aerial duels, which is 1 out of 2, but he's not very tall, is he? So, that's fair enough. Put in a really, really strong shift, obviously scoring the goal, creating a few decent openings for us as well. And he probably is a luxury player in the aspect of he's not always going to be the person to dig you out of trouble in this sort of scenario. He's the sort of player you want when you're 2-0 up and he'll try something fancy and he'll work that opening. But sometimes, like Friday night and like against Southampton, he can prove that, like you say, he can almost single-handedly drag us back through games and pick up the points, because without him and without that free kick, we wouldn't have scored on Friday night, because their keeper, other than that, actually had a pretty good game, I thought, denying Anis Mehmeti a couple of times.
Yeah, I think what impressed me so much was the off-the-ball stuff. I think if you think back to probably even, we might have said it on the first podcast we did, I think heading into the season there was some real question marks for me about how does a player like Scott Twine fit into a Gerhard Struber team. We've all heard the red ball, gegenpressing style, where you kind of know exactly what you're going to get, and you think of like an Emil Rees or an Anis Mehmeti, who are like physical specimens. You think, okay, that's somebody who's going to thrive in that sort of format. And you think of Scott Twine, and for all his technical ability, he's not necessarily the best athlete. I'd probably say that might be a bit harsh, but he's not the tallest, he's not the strongest. And although he showed against Southampton, he's not slow. He's not got that sort of electric pace of a Sinclair Armstrong style. So you kind of like, okay, how does he fit in? Because if he's only playing 110, can he play as a 10? Can he play out wide? Can he play deeper? And what he actually showed to me on Friday night was, yes, he can do all the hard stuff as well as kill the free kick in. We all know he can do that. But I think Gerhard Struber said it to us that basically don't think he called him a luxury player. I think the term he used was promotion player. He's your, for want of a better word, he is your like high profile moment of magic player, isn't he? And what he showed on Friday night was, yes, he can be that, and yes, he can be that while being other things. He will put in a tackle on the edge of his box, which he did on a couple of occasions. He'll play the simple pass and recycle possession. And I'm not saying playing him as basically, he was pretty much number 8, wasn't he, on Friday? Yeah. I'm not saying that's the solution to getting the best out of him every week. I'm not sure it is. I think if you put him up against a more physical midfield, he might struggle. But I think it was a timely reminder, was what I felt of, after probably a really difficult week for him, as he didn't get that involved in Stoke, and then obviously had a bad night against Blackburn. He probably, as much as a lot of other players did, he felt like one that sort of needed that display. And I think it's probably changed the way fans are talking about him for the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, 100%. I think he was back on it, and that's what you want to see. And we come back in a couple of weeks' time. I mean, Swansea obviously sacking their manager this morning after 6 months in charge is a very interesting one. Do they end up with a new manager bounce, things like that? They've not had a great start this season, obviously. And then you've got Wrexham, Portsmouth. Those are 3 massive games for fans on a sort of different level. And obviously for the players in terms of how our season's got to shape. We mentioned it last week. This is the start of 4.5 months of basically non-stop football, because there's now you get the 3 short bursts at the start of the season almost between the international breaks, and then you've got the massive one through to March. And that's where you want to go into it, sat in 5th, 6th, higher if you can, because then you come back and you've got that last sort of stretch of games. So if he can carry on playing like he has Friday, playing like he did against Southampton, Sheffield United, games like that, where he does just step up in those moments where you need him. I think probably Friday and Southampton are probably the best examples of that, because there weren't many chances, and the ones he got, he took, and he sort of played his part off the ball as well. Then everyone's got to be laughing, aren't they?
No, certainly, and probably the best chance of the second half comes from him as well. Really good through ball to Sinclair Armstrong. I think mentioned it for the goal City did score, but the timing of his run was really good. He seems to be incredibly aware at the moment that he doesn't have to set off early, because he's going to beat anyone there. It's a little bit of a teaser for me. I spent about 20 minutes up at the High Performance Centre with Sinclair on Monday afternoon for a little one-on-one interview that, really fortunate the club have agreed to do. I think the hopes is that that'll be out at the weekend. He's an incredibly honest guy. You'd have seen hints of that in his interviews with the club and Radio Bristol. And there wasn't really a topic off the table. He's very open about the challenges of last season and stuff like that. So I think I've plugged that enough, but hopefully that'll be with you. I think Saturday morning's the plan. But no, another really good run, and he actually sets himself really well. I've seen a lot of people turn in and saying he should be squaring it to Emil Rees, but you do well to find the striker, I think, in world football who's going to turn down a one-on-one in that situation. Unfortunately, like you mentioned, he kind of hits the keeper. It's a good save. He probably picks him out a little bit. That was probably the main chance of the second half. A lot of Vitek saves. Mehmeti gets one clawed out at the bottom corner. But yeah, in a weird way, it almost felt kind of comfortable, even though there was plenty of action at City's end. I don't know if you agree from watching at home, but I never felt it never had that sort of sinking pit in your stomach feeling of, they're going to find a way to drop their point here.
No, it didn't. And I feel like that's a feeling that we're all too familiar with as City fans. I think we mentioned it a couple of games ago against Birmingham, maybe.
Yeah, the Blues game.
We all almost got that scar tissue of being in good positions, whether that's winning or drawing, taking a good point like we were on Friday night, and then all of a sudden you're 3-1 down or 2-1 down, and it's gone, and all of a sudden you're back to, we won 3, then we lost 3. Where's the consistency? You're back into that Lee Johnson streakiness from the best part of 10 years ago now, to be fair. It's an interesting one, isn't it? It's nice to just get a fairly comfortable point, a strong point. I know Watford haven't had the greatest of starts to a season, but they're probably going to be in and around the mix. If they keep up that home form, then you can't really fault them. I know they're not great away from home. I think they're one of the worst away teams in the division from what I was reading the other day. Can't quite remember how far down the list they were. But when you compare that with our away form, which is really good, I feel like a point was always kind of on the cards when you look at it as, our only away loss was Stoke, and they hadn't dropped anything at home well, not only dropped on any wins anyway.
No, I had that feeling, didn't it? And I think it was interesting actually speaking to Gerhard Struber post-match, and he was not bothered at all that they hadn't won. And I think that speaks a lot about where City are, and it also speaks to me about what he felt and probably what the fans felt they needed. I think Matt Withers, who writes our fan column, mentioned how he felt it was a performance that restored pride after a difficult week, and I think that's almost what was as much important as the outcome on Friday. It was that those players could head down the tunnel, and those away fans packed into the away end could feel that, yeah, do you know what? This lot still have got a lot to give, because there's no doubt we've seen that over the course of it's a year today. I started covering the club, and we've definitely seen that over the last 12 months that I've been here, probably longer. That this is a group that really care and have plenty of endeavour, but that probably wasn't on show enough against Blackburn and Stoke. And like the same as one win doesn't make a season, one defeat doesn't end the season, but it just had that feeling that they needed to kind of go out there and leave everything on the pitch. And I honestly think to a man you couldn't question the effort on Friday night. I think one man there has been some question marks about, again, is probably Fally Mayulu. We hinted at it at the top of the show. It was his first league start for Bristol City since Boxing Day. His first competitive start of the season. I think he only started one game for Sturm Graz on loan last year. So, such little football. Before I kind of offer my thoughts on Jack, I just wondered what you made of his performance on Friday night.
Not a whole lot, really, I'll be honest. Kind of watching on the telly, it didn't feel like he got overly involved again, which it looked like, he was getting amongst it a little bit more than we've seen at times. But it's still just frustrating, I think, from a fan's perspective, because you can tell that there is a decent player in there on the ball. We saw that at the start of last season with his goals against Hull and Millwall, wasn't it? And they were two really well taken goals, really well taken finishes. He's got that nice little flick in him when he's got a bit of confidence and flary touches and things like that. Which obviously, you need to save for the right sort of time, because if you're doing those at 0-0 or 1-0 down, then unless it comes off, you got to look like a clown, aren't you? But it was an interesting one. It would surprise me, I think, if we see him starting again anytime soon. I think it might have been more because Emil Rees probably needed a bit of a rest. Obviously, coming off the back of that little knock, missing the Birmingham game, and then do you come on at Stoke and then start against Blackburn? Is that the right way around? I think it is. And then came on for the last half hour on Friday night as well. I think it may have been a case of we need two up front because we've not really got enough players to play anywhere else. And Emil probably needed a little bit more of a rest, having already played, 70 odd minutes maybe on Tuesday night. Because the last thing you want is a big injury to him.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's I was kind of surprised by the amount of discourse around Fally after Friday night, because I think it was just a nothing performance. And I don't mean that I'm not being hypercritical, but there wasn't a moment where I'm thinking, oh my God, how is this bloke on the field? Equally, there was nothing that made me think, all right, the penny's dropped. Do you know what I mean? I think, firstly, it's worth remembering we're talking about a 23-year-old lad here who's played if he's played an hour of football before Friday night, I'd be pleasantly surprised this season. Even in pre-season, his only outing was 45 minutes against Cheltenham Town in a team that would kind of had the feeling of almost City's B team that night. He's not played football, and that's something Struber was really keen to point to it. Post-match, I asked him quite honestly. I was like, "What have you made of? What did you make of tonight? Can you explain your thinking behind that?" And his he basically said Fally's really in it with his work on the training ground. Of course, none of us see that. We have to take Gerhard Struber's word there that he has shown that commitment that he said. He basically said he's earned his start. He did a lot of things they liked. Seemed to be really happy with the way he made room for Sinclair, which is probably the sort of thing that it wouldn't catch the eye either, would it? If he was doing that, if he's created room for it,
not massively, unless some sort of incredible decoy run like we saw. Was it Mehmeti do at Derby?
Yeah, or something
it has to be something really special like that for people to actually notice it sometimes. Yeah,
exactly. So it probably was the stuff that, to a degree, it's probably the stuff you just kind of expect your striker to do. I'm really aware I don't want to be too critical of him, because I think a lot of the talk, and there's questions around his work ethic. I think that's probably unfair, because you've probably got a bloke who's. It's interesting. Another bit from the Sinclair chat we spoke about was him saying how he's really when Struber first came in, he found the gegenpressing really difficult. And, actually just knowing when to go can be really tough. So I do think that's probably something to bear in mind, that you've got a lad who's probably not played down that system before, really. It's still learning the ropes of when to go. And you could hear that down below, because obviously the press box at Vicarage Road is kind of a fair way away, but you're almost in line with your away dugout, and you could hear Struber sometimes just shouting his name, like Fally, and that was obviously his key to go. But I was slightly surprised by the amount of talk around it, because I just thought it was a bit of a flat performance. It was interesting, the question I put to Gerhard after we asked him about, what he'd made of the performance was, is he somebody you still feel there's more to come from? Because I guess that's probably the concern from fans, isn't it? Is what we're seeing at the moment the best you're getting at Fally Mayulu? And he was like, no, there's still steps to go, but to get those steps, he's going to need minutes, and he's not had minutes. And I think we kind of touched on this the other week, but it's almost a bit of a paradox now, isn't it? Of he needs minutes. How are you going to give him those minutes while having Emil Reece, Sinclair Armstrong, and push him for what you hope to be a playoff spot?
I think we mentioned it a couple of weeks ago, didn't you? Like you said, and I think you mentioned it in the press conference to Gerhard almost directly, saying, is under 21 football a possibility at the moment, just to get those minutes in the legs, not because he'd be demoted from the squad or anything like that before people jump to any conclusions, but because, like you say, he needs the minutes. But if we're chasing a game and you're chucking him on, with all due respect to him, if it's between him and Sinclair Armstrong, I'd choose Sinclair Armstrong every day of the week at the moment, because he's more adapted to this system and has had those consistent minutes. I was just looking at it then, and Mayulu's now played 104 minutes this season. So like you say, that going into Friday night, less than an hour played. It's not a lot of football. So naturally, it's got to be a lot to get your head around. And if Armstrong's admitted there that it took him a fair while to get around, he played a lot of football last season and has played featured certainly a lot more under Struber than Mayulu has. And Mayulu's barely played a game since Christmas last year, which is
since last summer. Let's be frank, it's since last summer, because he barely played last year. He had two starts, one of which was in, if it was August, it was the first week of September, and the other one was 2 days before Christmas, wasn't it? Against West Brom.
Yeah.
And maybe Luton, where he came off. Yeah. And then Luton, where he came off after 45 minutes. We're talking about a lad there that he's not played football, and it shouldn't come as a surprise. There's rustiness there. I guess the question's going to be, and I think it'll tell us a lot what happens after the break, doesn't it? Is it when you've had a Reece who's had his feet up for 2 weeks, and an Armstrong who's had his feet up for 2 weeks after a really good month of football, how much are we going to see Mayulu? Because if he is training as well as Struber suggests, which, like I say, we've got no reason to doubt, and if he does feel he can take those next steps, we should see plenty of him in the lead up to and over the festive period, shouldn't we?
Yeah, I think what will be interesting is, because we come back into yet another 3-game week, which it feels like we're saying all the time with the Championship. Until I started doing this podcast and having to break them down, I didn't actually realise quite how many there are, I don't think. It is a lot, and maybe you see him feature at Wrexham, because that's the middle one, isn't it? So you maybe see him probably not start, you'd assume, because you'd think between Reece and Armstrong, like you say, having had that rest, they should be all right to work that out with those two. But you probably see him come on for 20 minutes, half an hour in that game, or against Portsmouth or Swansea as well. And I think that might be the role we see him in for a little bit if he's not playing for the 21s, to get those minutes as well. I think assuming that Reece and Armstrong are going to be back at their best and fully fit as much as they can be after this couple of weeks off, or a couple of weeks not playing at least, then yeah, it will definitely be interesting, but we'll probably not see him start again for a while, I'd assume.
Yeah, I think it's just a really interesting one, isn't it? I think it seemed, if you probably added it up, we probably talk about him far more often than he's played football. And I think that's almost been true of his entire City career, hasn't it? He's been spoken about so much without playing loads, and probably speaks volumes to where he is at the moment. I don't think he did anything. There wasn't a moment like the step over against Birmingham in there. There wasn't a moment like the throw in against Blackburn in there. Do you know what I mean? There wasn't a moment where you're going, oh my God, like, this is really bad. It wasn't perfect, but, there was a couple of nice moments. There was a nice little back heel to Mehmeti that I think it was early on. There was a nod down from I think it was a corner or a free kick. Yeah, it wasn't anything special, but it was just. There's obviously a player in there. The question is going to be, and it's been the case for about 15 months now. Is it going to be in a Bristol City shirt? But we probably don't want to spend too much more time on him. I think if we just look back at this block as a whole now, you mentioned it at the top of the show, Jack. 6 games, 3 wins on the spin, 2 defeats, and then a draw. 10 points from 18 games. When I know people will look at the position of the teams in the table that City have played, but that's a Birmingham team that have won 2 games back-to-back 4-0, isn't it, I think?
Yeah.
Pretty much. A Norwich team that, albeit have been incredibly poor this season, everybody looked at the start of the campaign expected to be up there. A Southampton team with parachute payments that everyone expected to be up there. A Stoke team that, are they still second? If they're not second now, they pretty much were.
I believe they are.
Yeah, they're up there or thereabouts. And then a Blackburn team that, although, to be fair, I don't think they're anything particularly special, they've had a decent little run of results. So, from my point of view, I think it's a case of it's all right, it could have been better, but I'm more than happy with that if I'm Gerhard Struber, especially considering the circumstances. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think overall it's been, we had a really, really good start to it. Like you said, that Norwich game is an interesting one. Everyone obviously expected them to be up there, and then they weren't. But even at that point, it's still a game where there was probably quite a lot of pressure on the players because of the circumstances with Manning, who's now obviously been let go from Norwich, which I think has probably been coming for a fair while. So we won't get to see him manage at Ashton Gate. Well, not for Norwich anyway this season. So that'll be interesting. But yeah, I think that was one where, whilst on paper, it was always, well, not always got a win, always should have been a win.
Yeah.
Given the form they were in, it had potential for Manning to have G'd his players up to the nines and go out there and just run at us and run through us. And they didn't. We did really well. We got the win. Southampton was a different kind of performance. We had to soak up a lot of pressure in that first half hour, go behind and show the fight to come back. Birmingham was different again, wasn't it? In that we had one shot on target, scored it, and then just had to kind of claw it out from there. And then you come on to Stoke, which is the only real properly disappointing one for me, I think, because whilst they're up there and they're a very good side, 5-1 isn't a good scoreline against anybody, is it? So, unless we were playing someone, like an Arsenal at the moment or something like that, I wouldn't be happy with a 5-1, no matter who we're playing. Let alone someone who you're kind of hoping to end up meeting in the playoffs or something like that this season. So that's the properly annoying one. And then Blackburn wasn't very good, and obviously it's a good point at Vicarage Road.
Yeah, I think probably the only slight concern, I'm not even sure it is really a concern, is that there's not been loads of sexiness, I guess, in that block, to use as rubricism has it. It's not been, you think back to like the first block, you obviously had the whole game was really front foot attacking. Same with Sheffield United, obviously, and then Wednesday after the break, you had similar. There was the Preston draw where they were really, really good. They won somewhere else away that I can't think of now, but you know what I mean. There were like really performances where you'd stop and go, okay, this team aren't just good; they're like really attractive and really hard working. But I do think everything we say here has to be caveated by the fact there were 10 senior players out of that team on Friday, which that's mental. And to not just be 10 first-team players, but to be your captain in Jason Knight, arguably your best defender this season in Rob Atkinson, Neto Borges, who's been a revelation, Mark Sykes, who's been in brilliant form, Max Bird, who started pretty much every game for a team that got in the playoffs last year, Pring, who pretty much did the same. We're talking about Josh Stokes, who you'd hope was going to be knocking on the door, Luke McNally, who we don't need to go over that one again. He's someone that's was integral when he was fit last year. Joe Williams the same. It's only when you probably stop and put that entire team out there and realise they're a goalkeeper shy of a competitive championship team. I've not mentioned Harry Cornet there, which I'm sure you'll be disappointed with. But what a man! But it's only when you put that sort of those names out there and go, hang on a minute, like that is a huge amount of absentees. To have taken 10 points with basically that whole group missing for the whole time. You take away Atkinson, Borges, and Sykes, who are kind of the new additions to that list, and you're like, I think that's a hell of an effort, and it means you're just within touching distance again of the playoffs for another 2 weeks, which I don't think you would have sniffed that with a fully fit squad really at this stage of the season.
No, not at all. And I think we mentioned it last week. It leads to real excitement when you get to the point of which, we're hoping Jason Knight might be back for Swansea. Pring maybe not too far behind him, hopefully. And then Max Bird that little bit later, and so on and so forth. Joe Williams, Luke McNally, the start of next year, Rob Atkinson, Christmas sort of time. When we get into the middle of January and we've hopefully just knocked off Rovers in the FA Cup, we'll be flying, mate. And hopefully we'll be in a very, very strong position once we've got, an actual fully fit first team squad, because I still don't think we've put out our best 11 yet this season because of the injuries.
No, I'd agree with that. And I think, the prospect of, judging by what Gerhard said after Watford, the prospect of a team potentially having Jason Knight, Cam Pring, Neto Borges, let's say those three back for that first week, and potentially Sykes if the recovery goes really well. Those four players, you can make an argument for all four of them basically sliding straight into the team. Obviously, yeah. I think they're going to manage. My gut feeling is they'll manage Cam Pring as carefully as possible, because 100%. When you actually look at it, if you take out that period where there weren't any games over the summer and the one playoff semi-final, he's pretty much out for probably about 6-7 months in that time, which it's you can't take any risks, especially the type of athlete he is, because he is so explosive. He runs a risk of like hamstring injuries and muscle injuries. Jason Knight, I think there'll be a temptation just to throw him back in because he just plays. But again, I don't think that's how Gerhard Struber operates. And he's said to us, hasn't he, on the record, that they need to think about and make changes about how they're utilising players when they're coming back. So I've seen a couple of early predicted teams going around with Cam Pring and Jason Knight both in the 11, and I think Jason Knight's probably more likely than Pring. But either way, I wouldn't be surprised if, come that Swansea game, he opts to basically stick with things as they are, because it feels like a bit stupid to take risks when, like you say, you've got that sort of 4-month block of wall-to-wall football coming up.
Yeah, 100%. I think Knight will be the really interesting one because, like you say, do you just go, oh, that's Jason Knight, it's all right, he played for a year and a half before he got an injury, straight back in you go. And then 10 minutes in, he does something to his hamstring because he hasn't played for 6 weeks and he's out for another 6. And that's like the worst nightmare, because then if you've not got Bird back, you're almost back in the same position, but with an extra left back in Cam Pring, which is a massive boost in itself. But we've got Neto, we've got other people who can play there. The midfield at the moment is basically just Adam Randall. So I think managing him and Max Bird when he eventually comes back as well will be really, really key. And like I say, Pring has been out for a long time. Was it Luton that he got injured?
Yeah, and then he came back for the second leg, didn't he? Yeah.
Played the second leg, which he probably shouldn't have done realistically. But we were left with very little option on the night. Will need to be managed as best we can, depending on Neto as well. But you'd like to think that he should be back if he was in contention on Friday in 2 weeks' time, unless something happens in training. He should be good to go. So there's no need really to rush Pring back, I don't think.
No, Gerhard seems as confident as he could be, probably about Neto. Sykes, I think Sykes is an interesting one, isn't it? Because it's almost not really. It's a different sort of injury. I think when you get like a cut compared to a muscle, it probably doesn't need managing as much. It's probably just a case of making sure they're as safe as possible, really. Yeah, I think that's kind of like the exciting thing, isn't it? You touched on it a second ago that there could be another gear to hit here, and I think that it sounds almost a bit pessimistic, but the fact they've managed to basically cling on in their current situation, they haven't done that either. They've still had some really good performances in there, some really good moments, but to keep the pace, basically, I think is really positive. And like you say, they come straight back in with a 3-game week and on form, and it counts for nothing in the Championship, does it? I know that, but that is a 3-game week where at this moment they'll come into all 3 of those matches as favourites, won't they?
Yeah, I think if you said to me right now, what do you want from that game? I'd be wanting to look at 7 points, ideally. I think 2 wins and a draw. One of the draws would probably being away. Fratton Park's not an easy place to go, and nor is Wrexham, to be fair. The crowd will be bang up for it at both. And let's not forget, Swansea at home is going to be a huge game. Ashton Gate should be rocking for that. I'd like to hope so anyway. Early kickoff on the Saturday, straight back in, and hopefully some good tackles and a nice victory over them as well, because it feels like it's been a little while since we've beaten them at home anyway. So that'll be nice. But yeah, you go into it, that wall-to-wall football, like you said there, 4 months is probably the most important time of the season, I think, because especially now till the new year, you realise properly then, I think, where teams are going to be or likely to be come May.
Well, I think you almost just look at the table now, don't you? So you think about that first week alone, 9 points up for grabs in that first week. Bristol City, in theory, could end that first week second in the Championship, or 9 points behind them is Portsmouth in 20th. I know that's not how it works, but it's all so tight, and it does feel like everyone's beating everyone. And it probably has a little bit more chaos to it. The news out of Swansea is today as we're recording it. Is it can't remember his name. Is it Alex Sheehan? Have I made that up? It might not be Alex.
Don't know. Definitely Sheehan. Let's just go with that.
Alan Sheehan. Alan Sheehan. My apologies.
Oh, that's confusing. Not Alan Shearer.
No, Alan Sheehan, Swansea manager, has been sacked today as we're recording this. They've had a really tough start of it. I think they lost 4-1 to Ipswich at the weekend, and I think that was at home. And there might have been away. No, it was at home, wasn't it?
At home, yeah.
And I think it got a little bit toxic by the sounds of what I've seen on social media. And he was somebody who was appointed as he was, I think, Michael Duff's assistant, and then became Luke Williams' assistant, and then took the caretaker job, and they gave him a 3-year deal in the summer. So it's an interesting one because he's been there for a long time, and he's probably part of a sort of structure that's been there even longer. It's interesting in their statement, Jack, they made no mention at all to a caretaker boss, which you'd suggest would probably mean they'd expect to have a new permanent head coach in by the time they come over to Ashton Gate.
Hopefully Russell Martin. Because I reckon we might win then, with a bit of luck.
Well, let's not delve into that topic. But I think it's an interesting talking point to kind of finish on here that, in a week where Gerhard Struber, it felt like kind of flexed his muscles a little bit tactically, didn't it, on Friday night? And, you only got to see his interaction with the fans and how proud he is when he talks about Bristol City. And I know these things can change, and I really don't want to tempt fate. But in a week where he feels like he's only probably further won over the fan base, Rob Edwards looks set to leave Middlesbrough after a matter of months. Liam Manning, obviously, formerly of this parish, has left Norwich City now. And, Swansea are up next. They've sacked their manager, as have Southampton already. It does feel, and it is really early days and things can change so quickly, it feels like City have found a really good fit for the club and for the players at the moment. And I really don't want to tempt fate, but, we're quick enough to criticise the club when their recruitment goes wrong. It seems like they've got a good head coach on board.
100%. I think this last probably almost a year now, probably, yeah, to be fair, most of 2025, probably since that Wolves FA Cup game, I think is the most connected I've seen fans and squad/staff in a long, long time at Ashton Gate. I think it's really, really good at the moment. And even when things aren't going great, like at Stoke, the mood when we went into the game against Blackburn, it didn't happen, but was very much still, that's all right, we'll win this, we'll bounce back. There's almost a calmness to it, which there hasn't been for a long time, which is really nice. I appreciate that result. Probably a bad example because it didn't go to plan, did it? But, I'm sure everyone gets my point.
No, I think it just feels like they've got a group of players there that carried their momentum from last year and carried that, probably more the hunger and determination from last year than the momentum, and a manager who just gets it, which I think it's such a cliche thing to say, and people, I'm sure if and when Gerhard Struber ever leaves, people will be clipping this up like they have been with those Rob Edwards interviews where he's talking about how much he loves Middlesbrough, but he just seems to understand it, and that can't be undervalued. And I'm not saying it will last forever, but it does feel like they've found a good one, and I think that's almost the best thing, isn't it? Is this international break's arrived, and you think you hinted at it a bit earlier. It could have very easily been one where you were welcoming it with open arms because you'd lost 3 in a row and all feeling quite negative. And now we're 2 days into it properly, and I'm already kind of slightly thinking, well, I can't wait for Swansea. I'm looking forward to the prospect of players being back and another chance for them to go on and kick on, which might not have been the case if they'd lost to Watford.
Yeah, 100%. I think, like you say, the mood around Ashton Gate for the most part is really, really good and has been for for quite some time now. And I think that, well, you'd like to think anyway, and I think the players have mentioned it in a few interviews and press conferences, that does sort of transmit onto the pitch and that they feel that support and that connection is really strong. And that's only presumably anyway got to lead to better and better results as the season goes on and we get better players back fit and things like that. And we've suddenly got a 25-man squad that there isn't actually, I don't think, a bad player in.
No, exactly. I think we pretty much takes us to an end, really. Obviously, it's a bit of a quiet week this week for Bristol City because there's not a senior player away on international duty. I think Jamie Knight-Labelle, I don't think, was in the Canada squad either. So I imagine he'll be in Swindon action this weekend. Adam Murphy was. Ross McCrory has dropped out of the Scotland squad. I'm told, I think there'll probably be an update from the club at some point, but as far as I'm aware, that is very much a case of precaution. He was picked. He then started, didn't he? He started against Blackburn, played about 40 minutes against Stoke, started and played the full 90 against Blackburn, which when you actually look at it, he's not done too often. He then played, I think, was it 57 minutes at Watford?
It was.
I know there was one or two people concerned that was going to be one of those cases of why did he come off at that time. Gerhard Struber basically said it's a case of we know his history, we know the workload we've put on him. Our one topic was to have a really good match plan, and our other topic was to avoid getting anyone injured. And he said he was very happy it wasn't an injury. Like I said, there might be confirmation from the club on that at some point, but as far as I'm aware, that was very much a precaution. I think a sensible one to take because I've asked Ross McCrory before about how disappointed he is to not be named in a Scotland squad, and he is very open about the fact he feels he should be playing. So I can't imagine it as a decision taken lightly by whoever it was made by to withdraw from that squad. But yeah, so obviously Jason Knight's not in there. Mark Sykes was called up for Ireland but won't be going away. Sinclair Armstrong wasn't called up, but you'd imagine if he keeps playing well, he's probably got half a chance because he's been in and around it before. Max O'Leary obviously isn't being called up at the moment. I imagine there's a lack of game time. So as far as I know, I think Adam Murphy's the only senior player going away, and he's going away with Ireland under 21s. I guess we can end on a quite upbeat mood there about Alex Scott as well. One of Bristol City's own technically could be making an England debut this week.
I really hope so. I really, really hope so. I think it was, I think I mentioned it on social media the other day, it was one of those where if you were a City fan, or well, to be fair, even just a Championship fan between 2021 and 2023, you probably looked at Alex Scott and went, yeah, you know what? He's one of the better players in this division and is probably a future England international if he carries on, the trajectory. And it probably got stunted a little bit by injuries. We sold him injured, didn't we? And he picked up some random injuries in his time at Bournemouth, like a broken jaw off the back of Tyrone Mings, which is always nice. But yeah, to get in that England squad, fair play to him. Hopefully, Tuchel gives him some minutes. England have already qualified, so you'd like to think, whilst obviously maintaining that 100% record, which we should do either way, players like Alex Scott and O'Reilly and stuff like that from Man City should get some reasonable minutes, even if it's half an hour in both games, things like that, just to see how they wear an England shirt and see what happens.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to think that somewhere Nigel Pearson will enjoy watching that, as will many others at Bristol City Football Club that played a huge part in his development. Because I think it's easy to forget that he arrived as someone who's not really been in an academy system for a while. Fallen was playing non-league football at Guernsey. I don't even know what step that is, but and within 18 months of signing his pre-contract was playing first team football week in, week out what was that when you actually think back to it? It was a hell of a midfield with Matty James, Andy King, Joe Williams. He was as involved as any of them. So I think hopefully everyone involved in that will enjoy watching him hopefully on Thursday night, fingers crossed. And I have to imagine there's a chance for him to get in that World Cup squad, considering the competition for a place in midfield. But that feels like quite a happy note to kind of wrap up on. Obviously, we can't do any score predictions this week, Jack, which is a bit disappointing.
We can, but do you know what we can do? What did you have for food at Vicarage Road, mate? Because we haven't had an update on away day scran for a little while.
Away day scran. It was sweet and sour chicken at Vicarage Road with rice, which was really good. There were prawn crackers on offer, but I don't know what it was about me. I was not offered the prawn crackers. I should have just put my foot down. Let's be honest. It's a lack of lack of composure for me to just say I want the prawn crackers. But yeah, it was
He's one
good.
of the
It was good.
crackers. He's gone for him and he's bottled it.
It was good. We've had some good food, mate. Up at Stoke the other week, we had chili. Oh, it was incredible. Ashton Gate. I've said it on here. I think recently, the game has been upped by the Ashton Gate press team, mainly Ken, who always gets a shout out. But we've had some incredible food. We had I think I might have mentioned the curry goat last time we were on.
But you did.
Then we've had a chicken tagine, and I can't remember what it was last time. What was it? It was
better than the football,
buttered chicken and rice. It was just they've upped their game. So hopefully that continues after the break. I can't speak highly enough of that. You just made me jealous of the fact I now remember that I won't be getting any of that for this weekend. I'll have to fend for myself on Saturday for lunch, which is never as fun as getting some Ashton Gate scran. But what have you got planned for your weekend?
Looking after the dog, mate. Looking after the dog, and then I've got to go to Corsham for Swindon Women on Sunday. Shout out to them. Beat Cheltenham Town, FA Women's National League Cup quarter final. Here we come. Bournemouth at home. Buzzing.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to sneak it in at the end and hope everyone's clicked off by the time I get here. I have actually got some annual leave booked this week. My last annual leave. I'm off over the weekend and a bit either side, but and then it's the long old slog through to March. So it's getting my rest in where I can. I'm trying to be like Gerhard and Emil Rees and get my feet up for a few days.
You going anywhere fun?
No, a couple of days away, mate. Just a nice quiet one. A little bit of a time away, ready for the slog up till Christmas. But yeah, that pretty much takes us up to the end. Obviously, like I said, we'll have a bit of content out before I'm off anyway. But big Sinclair Armstrong interview. I think it's about 2,500 words. It's ended up being. It's a biggie. Like I said, really open. That's hopefully out this weekend, and you'll be able to find that and all our other content on the Bristol Live website. We're obviously on social media, as is Jack. You can drop him a follow. And as usual, if you've liked what you've listened to today, drop it a like on YouTube if you're on there, a rating on Spotify, or a review if possible. Or you can comment as well, I think. So anything you can do to help spread the pod will be much appreciated. But we'll probably be back next week to preview Swansea, I thought, Jack. So until then,
we absolutely will be.
Everyone, thanks for listening.
Cheers, guys.